What really happened with your host, Mike Rivero. You're listening to the Republic Broadcasting Network, where you'll find out what the Fukushima's going on.
And aloha, America. Welcome to our show today. And it is Monday, November 12th, 2018. Today is the official commemoration, of course, of Veterans Day, which was actually yesterday, the 100th anniversary of the end of World War I. So it's a holiday for a lot of people, not for us here at RBN, obviously, but still kind of a kickback feel to the day a little tiny bit here. Anyway, we have got a lot of stuff to talk about today. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. Mike is in our control room, ready to answer the phone, put you on the air with your comments and questions. So let's just get right on into it. Obviously, the situation in Broward County, Palm Beach, other areas in Florida, we're in a repeat of 2000. It's 2000 all over again. 18 years this nation has had to overhaul and revamp the election system to get it working so that the people can actually have some confidence that the people being voted for are the ones who are actually getting into office. Because right now, that confidence is gone here. Anyway, apparently, Broward County is doing recounts in for Florida races, according to CNN. And the Florida Secretary of State, Ken Detzner, has ordered them in tight races for Senate, governor, attorney general, one of the commissioners, and there's a statewide machine count. Now, there was supposed to be a deadline noon Saturday, which nobody really made. The recount is still going on here. Now, Governor Rick Scott is still out there saying that there are plenty of indications of fraud out there. And he is demanding a law enforcement investigation, which is now being ordered by Florida's Attorney General. Apparently in Broward County, where we know the police are a little bit politicized, just like saying the Titanic hit a little ice, they're just kicking back and saying, no, we don't see anything irregular. We're not going to investigate. Well, they're now being ordered to. And frankly, given how notorious the Broward police are, I would get some outside investigators in there to take care of that. So Rick Scott's campaign announced 3 more election lawsuits. And Palm Beach says, no, they're not going to make the recount deadline. Protesters are accusing officials of incompetence. That's the cover story. There's no fraud, but yeah, they're incompetent. They've made so many mistakes, and really, the equipment is getting older, and that's all it really is. There's no fraud. The corporate media is still trying to convince you that the elections are honest and transparent, and they're not here. Apparently, 2 different organizations financed by George Soros are threatening to take Florida Governor Rick Scott to court if he doesn't recuse himself from the state's recount, which includes his own senatorial election. Now, he is the governor of the state, and so apparently he was sent a letter by the League of Women Voters, who have their own dark history of election misbehaving, and Common Cause. All right, we're going to grab a phone call here. Jim in Chicago, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hello, Michael. A couple of things where I'm criticizing Donald Trump, and you might agree. Don't you think it was very highly inappropriate for him to make nasty comments toward the state of California while people are losing their lives, running from the fire, and he's basically blaming the state for the fires? Don't you think that's kind of inappropriate?
No, I've been doing exactly the same thing here on my show. Trump is absolutely right on this one. It was chronic mismanagement. I've been talking every time there's one of these fires, I point out there's no money being spent to manage the forest areas. They're not keeping the fire breaks open. They're not clearing out the dead brush. because they're spending the money making sure that illegal immigrants have got driver's licenses and voting registration cards and free school and free health care and all the rest of that. And California's official policy towards the forest lands is one of environmentalism, where they wanted to let it to go back to being more like nature, which means the buildup of dead brush, the growing over of the fire breaks, because it looks more natural and environmental that way. Well, there's the problem. Once you get nature's cigarette lighter, lightning, to touch that off, and you've got Santa Ana winds, there is nothing to stop that. And California's government mismanaged the forest lands, and all these people who are losing their homes and their lives should be looking at their own government for just how badly this was set up. And by the way, not just the government, not just lightning, but apparently there are now two different power grid companies which are thought to have sparked two of the fires. Up in Northern California, it was PG&E, and of course down in Los Angeles, Southern California, Edison. We're going to have more about these fires after we're done with the voting circus, okay?
Okay, tell me this then. Doesn't the federal government give like 60% of the money that goes toward fire protection to the state of California?
But California gets to decide where it goes. And, California just decided on this thing about, we want it to look more natural. We want it to look more beautiful. And it's not like they didn't know what was going to happen, because they made the same mistake with Yellowstone several years ago, where they said, we're going to let it go back more to nature, and we're going to stop clearing out the dead brush. We don't want it looking like it's a golf course. We want a more natural park. And sure enough, they get a wildfire there that almost pretty much wrecked the place. And
that's something I was not aware of. I'm glad you're explaining it.
Yeah.
Okay. And the other question, Donald Trump is complaining of the election, and this is something that you stated last week. He had the opportunity of doing something about it with the Federal Election Commission, and he decided to disband that.
Oh, it was the Election Integrity Commission, and he disbanded it, and he turned the job over to Department of Homeland Security. But Department of Homeland Security basically just, they said, we're going to make sure the machines cannot be hacked into remotely, and that was about it. And that leaves only about maybe 40 or 50 other ways for the election to be rigged. This election is a joke. It's an absolute disaster.
No, this is the worst I have ever seen it before, to be honest with you.
I agree.
So, all right, thank you very much, Michael.
All right, thanks an awful lot. We're going to let you go. We are going to do a shout out to our on-air affiliates who are just now rejoining the network and getting on back to the debacle in our elections. Let's see. It looks like my Twitch text window has stopped. Okay, there we are. We're back. Yeah. All right. So we're talking about down in Florida. And by the way, it's not confined to Florida. Back in 2000, the focus was on Florida because that was the tipping point as to whether Gore or Bush would wind up being the president. And this, of course, being midterms, a lot more attention is being focused on other states where there have been what the media is still describing as irregularities. They're not irregularities. People are being caught cheating. So anyway, apparently down in Palm Beach County, their election supervisor is trying to ban the media from covering the ballot recount and has actually threatened to arrest reporters who attempt to do so. Now, this prompted a lawsuit from NBC Universal, Scripps Media, and Fox Television, basically saying that they have a First Amendment right to record video when this recount is going on. That's supposed to be transparent. And the judge agreed. So, got something to hide down there in Palm Beach? Over in Broward County, machine glitches delayed the start of the ballot recount. We had glitches. Now, Governor Rick Scott requested a judge to impound all voting machines not being used for the recount so that they could be inspected. And this particular judge denied the motion, but said that we'll just post more people in the recount room to make sure nothing is going on. But there is an issue, because over at Real News, they're saying that, yeah, a lot of the voting machines, not just in Florida, but all across the country, they're already being swapped out because they've been pre-rigged to favor Democrats, and now they need to basically get them out of there before there is the post-election recertification of the machines. So, I mean, it's just crooked as all get out here. Governor Scott is also asking that the ballots be guarded during the recount so that nobody can get on in there and tamper with them. Yeah, good idea. But it's really out of control. Apparently, over in Brenda Snipes' office, they mixed bad provisional ballots with good ones. And then they went ahead and said, well, we're going to have to count everything here in the box. Anyway, it would be unfair to throw out all those votes. I mean, they're just throwing ballots into the boxes right in front of everybody. And, oh, it was a mistake. Really? Let's count them here. A few days ago, actually Friday night, GOP Representative Matt Gaetz was actually taking video of Florida election officials loading boxes onto trucks outside the Broward County Election Supervisor's office. Now, on the assumption those were ballots, that violates chain of custody. But the Broward police, remember what I said before about them being politicized, showed up and literally removed GOP Representative Matt Gaetz by force. Said, you can't be here, you got to go along. Brenda Snipes is now banning conservative journalists from the Broward County Supervisor of Elections office. Apparently, Laura Loomer and others were denied entry. And let's see, Demand Justice. This is an organization founded by former members of Hillary Clinton's 2016 campaign and associated with a social welfare organization financed by billionaire activist, you knew this was coming, George Soros. And they're helping to find volunteers to take part in the recount of Senator Bill Nelson's campaign. I don't think they'll be objective. I mean, it's so blatant and in your face. And Jim in Chicago was right. It's never been this bad and this obvious how crooked the elections are in this country. Now, as I mentioned earlier in the program, the Florida Attorney General, Pam Bondi, has issued directions for the Florida Department of Law Enforcement to take steps to guarantee the integrity in elections. Frankly, it's a little late. The election's already over. The damage has been done. But apparently, Bondi's directive basically came after the Florida Department of Law Enforcement said they hadn't launched their own investigation into election officials in Broward and Palm Beach counties because they did not see any evidence of fraud. So Bondi wrote back basically saying she doesn't see how the FDLE can legitimately refuse to open an investigation. Well, the shred of evidence, let's see. Now my YouTube stream has gone down. We're just having a really, really bad day with the technology. Okay, well, nothing I can do about it. Till the next commercial break here. Okay, getting on back here. Now, as you know, there are lawsuits flying all over the place, and there are, of course, judges and lawyers, if you will, as the recounts are proceeding. We saw this back in 2000. Ballots are being challenged. That's not a valid ballot, and they'll go back and forth, and then there'll be a judge who says, yes, it can be counted, no, it cannot. Apparently, lawyers for the Florida Democratic candidates Andrew Gillum and Bill Nelson admitted non-citizens were casting votes in Florida, and then objected when the judge said these have to be thrown out. And I would like to remind everybody in this country one more time, non-citizens are not allowed to cast votes in this country. Okay, now, as I said before, the cover story is, it's all innocent mistakes. They're dumb. They're incompetent. And apparently, over at the New York Times, a former Democratic official, Lori Parrish, basically said, you have to be clever to commit election fraud, and Brenda Snipes is too incompetent to commit election fraud. So it just has to be accidents, and there's no intentional fraud. Actually, I would say that Brenda Snipes is too incompetent to commit election fraud and get away with it, because it's just all over the place here. And one of the reasons people are thinking that there has been election fraud yet again is that a lot of these newly discovered ballots that just turned up, they're not completely filled out. They'll have the governor's and Senate race and a few others filled out, and all of the small local offices down below are left blank. Gee, doesn't that look suspicious, like somebody just filled this out in a rush? Oh, no. It's a poorly designed ballot in Broward. Once again, 18 years later, we have a ballot that's confusing to people in Broward County, and that's what led to the undervoting. Senator Rubio last week was out there talking about, apparently some people who have witnessed the fraud have been let go. They are now issuing statements under oath saying that, yeah, they did see a lot of bad stuff going on. And apparently over in Palm Beach County, they were filling out new ballots, supposedly to replace damaged ballots, but they did not allow campaign representatives to witness the process to guarantee that the newly filled out ballots exactly matched the old damaged ones. So that's a good way to stuff a ballot box. You take a bunch of ballots. Oh, these are all damaged. And you just toss them and you fill out an identical number of new ballots going the way that you want. All right, we got a caller on the line. Joe in Tennessee, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Well, hi, Mike. To me, either this guy, Scott, is the dumbest governor in the history of the world. I mean, if he didn't know this was coming from Broward County, or this is one of the best sting operations that we're going to see play out to expose this kind of corruption. But one of the two are at play. I mean, if Scott loses and he didn't appreciate that this corrupt lady was in Broward County, one of the biggest counties in Florida that could tip the election. As governor, he doesn't know this. None of his aides told him about her. I mean, that to me is very shocking and surprising. But as I said,
well,
if he didn't know
to me like you're blaming the victim.
Well, I'm blaming him for incompetence. I mean, he is the governor of a state. He's supposed to be aware of it. I mean, we know this lady, Wanda Sykes or whatever, is notorious. That is the most corrupt county in the state. I mean, we had the shooting there. Scott Israel's there. The guy with the bombs that was just recently is out of there. Debbie Wasserman Schultz is there. They had a federal agent murdered there on the beach. I mean, it's incredible what's going on out of there. And if the governor is sitting there in Tallahassee unaware of this, I mean, that's a dereliction of duty by being incompetent, as far as I'm concerned. But I have a feeling this is an elaborate sting. I really do.
I disagree with you, and I have to let you go. We got to take a break for commercials. Okay. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. And I'm trying to get the YouTube feed back up, but it's refusing to connect. And I suspect the problem as it is at YouTube's end because I just completely restarted everything. All right, getting on back to the, let's see. Yeah, it failed to connect to the server. Whatever's going on is at YouTube's end. Maybe they just finally got around to cutting me off. So we're talking about the debacle down in Broward County. And I disagree with Joe's. This is not an elaborate sting. And I'm sure that Governor Scott knew there would be some skullduggery, especially based on the history of the state in the past. I think he underestimated how much there would be. And there's been a lot. I mean, this midterm election makes Florida 2000, look like a couple of hand slaps, and that was it, and it was over. This is all over the place. It's massive fraud. Okay, so they keep finding all these boxes full of ballots. Oh, they have to be counted. I'm sorry, we have to count these here. And there is this teacher in Florida who found a container labeled provisional ballot box in a storage area of her elementary school on Thursday. And oh my goodness, there it was. And she called the school's principal and basically turned it on over to the election officials. But it is weird how these boxes keep mysteriously turning up. And it kind of makes you wonder if the boxes that were being taken out of the elections office were being simply delivered around to places where they could be discovered the next morning. Over in Georgia, they've just announced that they found thousands of new ballots. Oh, wow, man, can't even imagine how we could overlook that. This is basically tomorrow is the week after the midterms. And the Democrats there are saying they found thousands of new absentee, early, and election day votes that, gosh, gee, they were somehow not counted, and we've got to put them into that recount here. Over at the Fort Lauderdale Airport, an Avis employee found a box labeled with the supervisor of elections and the word provisional in the back of the returned car on Sunday night. And apparently, according to Davis, the last person to drive the car was a Broward County employee. Interestingly enough, the Broward County Police were uninterested and couldn't be bothered to pick up the ballot box left in the Avis rental car. Something else will happen. Down in Miami, they've counted all the ballots, but apparently there are still uncounted ballots, scores of them, left in Opa-locka Mail Center. Over in New Mexico, the GOP candidate won the New Mexico seat for the 2nd District congressional race. The race was called for Yvette Harrell when she went to bed Tuesday night. And then overnight, magically, 8,000 ballots showed up and tipped the race to the Democrats. Over in Indiana, 22,000 ballots have mysteriously been found. It's happening everywhere. That's what you need to be looking at right now. It's not just Florida. Florida's an extreme case. It's happening everywhere. Our elections are crooked. Out in California, Rohrabacher is refusing to concede, even though the corporate media is saying that the Democrat won. And there is reason to doubt. There is really reason to doubt. And there is this article over in Starship Earth, the Big Picture, and the headline really lays it out. The U.S. midterm election was an unequivocal, unadulterated farce as proven by leftist defiance of the courts and federal laws. And that's another aspect you have to keep in mind. Down in Florida, they were in violation of the law. They ignored court orders. The Democrats have gone outlaw, and I will not live under an outlaw government. So over in California again, apparently one of their poll officers has gone public saying the California DMV mailed ballots to illegal immigrants who are not supposed to vote. They then use them to vote and mail them in. Then when the citizen arrives to vote in person, having never signed up for mail-in ballots, his or her vote gets tossed out. Because if there's both an in-person vote and a mail-in ballot, the mail-in ballot takes priority over the in-person vote. It should actually, obviously, be the other way around. We're going to take another break for commercials, and we'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. And apparently, there is an issue at YouTube where my front end for the video can't find the server that is supposed to be out there. My radio show archive page is still up and visible, so it's not like YouTube is deliberately messing with me, but that could happen at any time. All righty, let's see. Now, let's get on back to this Florida voting debacle, because I'm sure that the corporate media, and not to mention the Democrats, are going to want to frame what happened in terms of an argument. Was there deliberate fraud, or is it just massive incompetence? Because that's going to take Americans' minds off the real question, which is, what do you do when you have elections that have become totally untrustworthy, where the American people do not actually know for a fact who won? Because that puts us into a situation of taxation without representation. Americans are paying in the taxes to a government that just spends it wherever it wants to go, and we don't know if the government is supposed to be there because we can't trust this election system. And I'm hoping that this mess just gets uglier and uglier. And I know the corporate media is ignoring it pretty much. In fact, the corporate media is already going on to the fact that the Democrats are going to investigate Donald Trump when they take the House of Representatives. But this is a big scandal. And I think Americans need to really take a look and say, yeah, if I'm not in charge of who gets into the government, if the people, the majority of Americans voted for, get kicked out through fraud, then the whole system is broken. The contract is null and void. So getting on back to what's happening, Nancy Pelosi is out there talking about her second pivot, a regime change in the United States. They're going to get Donald Trump out there. And, of course, Trump has now fired Attorney General Jeff Sessions. He's appointed an interim acting Attorney General. And there are all these critics out there screaming, this may be unconstitutional. It may be illegal. No, it isn't. Read your Constitution. The president does have that authority. And so now Mueller is feeling like he is in the crosshairs because millions of dollars and nearly 2 years later, he hasn't come up with anything. He's got a busted flush. I think Trump's going to hold him to that. Now, a lot of Democrats are saying they do not want Nancy Pelosi to be Speaker of the House, and they're looking for a credible opponent because the leadership elections are coming up, well, I imagine as soon as the new Congress is seated here. But apparently Democrats are saying they have at least 85 Trump investigation targets. Their plan is to bury the White House in lawfare and paperwork and trivial investigations, just to bury, to paralyze him. So he can't accomplish anything in the remaining 2 years of his office here. Now, interestingly enough, CNN and Jim Acosta have supposedly, this was reported, then it's been denied, but supposedly they were looking at a lawsuit against the Trump administration for the removal of Jim Acosta's press credentials following that confrontation in the press room at the White House. And I got to be honest, I went back and took a look at some of the back and forth with Acosta and the president. Acosta behaved very badly and unprofessionally. And so I think it's silly for anybody to think that they could sue the White House. It's the president and the press office decision who gets a press pass or not. So we'll see what happens on that. Now, do you remember when Barack Obama, following his first press conference as president, he had Helen Thomas kicked out of the press corps, had her press credentials yanked? Nobody made a big stink about that. Nobody was out there talking about potential lawsuits. That was because she asked a bad question. Okay. It's interesting to see how CNN is willing to get tough on Trump and yet just is still tiptoes around Israel, just so lightly. And it's rather interesting because this all has to do with that border issue. And yes, the migrant horde is still coming this way. The idea about whether somebody throwing rocks across the fence could be shot. And you can see the irony there, because ever since the start of the Great March of Return, IDF forces have been shooting Gazans for throwing rocks. CNN thinks that's perfectly fine. They don't really cover it. They don't even mention the fact that Israel is using these butterfly bullets that expand on impact to maximize the damage. But boy, when Donald Trump is talking about doing the same thing at our border, oh, CNN is out there. They're going to get tough here. All righty. This kind of disgusted me. And it has to do with the fact that the president has just handed out the Medal of Freedom to a top donor, to Miriam Adelson, who's the wife of Sheldon Adelson, who is a GOP mega donor. And the Adelsons recently contributed $113 million to GOP causes during the midterm cycle. Now, that's not what the Medal of Freedom is supposed to be used for. And it just shows that Trump, like every other politician, he can be bought if the numbers are big enough. And I think it's an insult to everybody who ever won the Medal of Freedom for legitimately doing something good for the country. All right, so let's talk about that fire out in California, because it's bad. 31 known dead, almost 300 missing, 7,000 structures destroyed, and they're still having to deal with the Santa Ana winds. Okay. And it's really bad. Now, as I mentioned to that caller before, the state of California did it to themselves, and Trump is absolutely right to say it was gross mismanagement. And it was basically California refusing to take the lesson from Yellowstone, just decided they were going to allow the forest areas to go back to the wild, not maintain the fire breaks, not clear out the dead brush and destroy it, not do the controlled burns or any of that stuff, which also saved California a lot of money. And their budget is very, very tight. So they were basically being penny pinchers, and trying to justify it by saying it's good for the environment. No, it isn't. It isn't good for the environment at all, as you can see right now. So, and apparently this neglect goes back for years. Forests have to be actively managed in order to be safe. Didn't work. One of the other really scary parts about this is the Woolsey fire has now burned across the Santa Susana laboratory, the field lab. This is that laboratory out in Simi, where a lot of classified work was being done. Rocket engines were being tested, a lot of nuclear research being done. It's considered one of the most heavily contaminated pieces of soil inside the United States of America. And of course, what we're getting from the government and the corporate media is don't worry about all that smoke coming out of Santa Susana. It's going to be perfectly safe. And the people living around Santa Susana are already dealing with elevated rates for cancers, leukemias, and things like that. And the government doesn't want to spend the money to clean that mess up either. They're kind of leaving it like Hanford. It's just going to sit. Now, apparently the situation in California is so bad that our current stink face with Russia has had to be put on hold because Seaplane Global Air Services of the United States has placed a firm order with Beriev Aircraft Company for 4 BE-200ES twin-engined amphibian aircraft plus options for 6 more. Now, the BE-200ES it's world famous. It's a water-scooping firefighting aircraft. It's got a wingspan of 108 feet, a flight range of 2,000 miles, a top speed of 435 miles per hour, weighs more than 60,000 pounds. So the Seaplane Air Service is buying 2 of these. They may wind up buying 6. And again, great that it's happening. Way, way too late. Remember, we did this story a while back when one of the earlier wildfires started up, and the aircraft they had to use as water bombers were proving less than adequate. And it came on out that, again, because of budget constraints, the contract that had been made with a company that was able to supply one of these large Russian water carriers had been allowed to expire, which meant the plane was not available anymore because it was off busy doing something else. By the way, James Woods, actor James Woods, is using his Twitter channels to help people displaced by the fires find each other and reconnect. Because apparently a lot of people just had to leave real quick. They don't have their personal information with them. It's even affecting us here in Oahu because some of the people at Claire's Church have family that are in the fire area, and they've had to evacuate. At least one lost their house completely. So good for James. He's doing that. What a terrible, terrible situation that is. Okay, so getting on to the conflict zones, and there's a lot of them. Clashes are erupting between the militants and the Syrian army in the Idlib de-escalation zone, which we knew was going to happen once the Syrian forces freed those hostages, which had been used as leverage by ISIS. Once they got them back, we knew that this was going to crank on up here. U.S. airstrikes have killed another 41 civilians in eastern Syria. Well, how dare they stand there under our bombs? That's a really dumb thing to do. They should not do that. It's all their fault. Interesting little story has come on out. This is from Al-Masdar News. Apparently, Germany secretly paid the rebels in Syria nearly 50 million euros. So Germany was in there messing around trying to get Assad out. Okay. No, I didn't want to do that. Over in Hodeida, the fighting is continuing there, and the Saudi backed invasion forces are pushing deeper into the vital port. 80 people have been killed over there. Now, somebody asked this very interesting question. This was over at lowblog.com. Will House Democrats end U.S. involvement in the Yemen war? And my response is this a trick question? Because no, I don't think they will. I don't think they will at all. The war is good for the war business, and I'm sure that all these politicians' stock portfolios are loaded up with war stocks, and they're making money hand over fist. Now, according to this other report that we're seeing over in Yahoo, the Pentagon has launched a new classified operation to support the Saudi coalition in Yemen. And this is coming out of a Defense Department document that was apparently posted online inadvertently. So there is a whoopsie there. And the existence of the new classified operation, codenamed Yukon Journey, was partly revealed in a Defense Department Inspector General report posted online early this month, which noted that the Secretary of Defense designated 3 new named contingency operations, one of which was Yukon Journey, and operations in Northwest Africa and East Africa, supposedly focusing on Al-Qaeda and ISIS. So Africa is the new battleground because they've got all of those wonderful, wonderful undeveloped natural resources. Okay. The Iraq Parliament is now asking the U.S. government to commit to a timetable for a pullout of their country. And Iraq's government said they were never going to agree to an open-ended foreign military presence, and it's time for the United States to take their toys and go home. So we'll see what the U.S. is going to do about that, because my read is the United States has no intentions of leaving Iraq. The United States has more than 700 permanent military bases around the world. That's why the defense budget is so huge, with so little left over for things like, taking care of the veterans. Got to maintain all those bases, have to garrison the planet, garrison the empire. But the government of Iraq is getting impatient. They want the U.S. to leave. So there's going to be a little kerfuffle there. All right, we got to take another break for commercials, and we will be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. And, it's funny. Over in Great Britain, they will not let that Sergei Skripal case go. They're just not going to let it go. And part of course, they've had to bring it back up again because they're using it as justification to try and bring more sanctions against Russia. This was a chemical weapons attack on our soil. And again, the whole thing is looking more and more like a hoax. It's looking more and more like Sergei Skripal and Yulia fell victim to food poisoning at a restaurant that had a reputation for serving seafood that could cause illness. And I think Great Britain just seized on it because of this man's notoriety and said, it's the evil Putin. He's committed this crime on our soil. And they're still pushing on it. And after a while, it just gets boring, I think. And, Great Britain is still saying, they've had to decontaminate all these police cars and go through all this other stuff because of how deadly the Novichok is, except that, nobody in the neighborhood ever got sick from supposedly, this Novichok being smeared on a door handle. And it's also a very deadly poison, which begs the question of why Sergei and Yulia both survived it. Now, anyway, over in the University of Sussex, there's a professor emeritus, Kees van der Pijl, I think. He retired from his post as head of the university's Department of International Relations in 2012. And over this weekend, he put up a tweet saying that Israel was behind 9/11, not Saudi Arabia, and that they had help from Zionists inside the U.S. government. And this professor, who's originally from the Netherlands, linked to an article titled 9/11 Israel Did It, which we've seen. It's been posted all over the place. And of course, just provoked tremendous outrage, where Jewish groups are demanding that his emeritus status be stripped from him. And the guy's retired. It's not like there's really all that much they can do to him. All righty. The European Parliament, for some reason, is saying that they are very shocked at the amount of EU-made weapons in the hands of terrorists. Well, you shouldn't be. You've been selling this stuff to arms dealers. They pass it on. We know that the U.S. buys foreign-made arms and gets them to groups like ISIS and Al-Qaeda to try and have deniability. All right, we're going to take a break for station identification. We'll be right back. The phones are open, 800-313-9443. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. And get that out of the way here. So, the European Parliament, they're shocked, absolutely shocked, that a lot of EU-made weapons are in the hands of terrorists. Well, if you don't want that to happen, stop making weapons. Stop selling them. Yeah, weapons get commandeered, and it's almost like a giant laundry, because when you're running covert ops and you're supporting these paramilitary groups, you don't want it to be easy to trace back to you, so you'll get somebody else's gun. If you remember the movie Charlie Wilson's War, which was Tom Hanks, and it's a humorous, somewhat, embellished telling of the war against the Soviet Union in Afghanistan. And they were arming the Mujahideen using Russian weapons bought from Israel. That's how these things get done. So the European Parliament should not be shocked at all. Now, as you know, the NATO had this huge military exercise in the waters around Norway and the mountains. But apparently the GPS system quit working for a lot of people. And of course, the first suspicion is, it was those gosh darn Russians. It was those gosh darn Russians. No, it could be cheaply made equipment from the lowest bidder. We don't really know. I mean, looking at some of the stuff that has come out recently, it could just be a quality control issue. And by the way, the GPS satellites that America put up there are notoriously easy to hack into. You don't have to be Russia to do it. Could have been China. Could have been some of the locals right there in Norway who were getting fed up with all that soldier poop being left on their land. All right, we're going to take a phone call now from Philip in Virginia. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Aloha, Mike. One word about that Charlie Wilson's War you just mentioned. There was an interesting, candid, could have been embellished, but admission in that it's the bathtub scene. You might remember, and he was talking about who his constituents are, and who gets him elected. But anyway, today being the Veterans Day observance, I had a question about the Iran hostage situation. This question arose from an interview I heard today. Being Veterans Day, the host of the show had one of the guards that was there and went through all of that 40 years ago this year. And it seemed to me that there was a backstory to that and what brought about that whole scene or situation. And I seemed that you've talked about this before. Is there a what really happened moment with the Iranian hostage so-called crisis?
Well, I don't have a specific article that I've created for it because it did happen all the way back in 1979, and pretty much all of the original content of what really happened is stuff that has happened since 1994 when I got blacklisted out of Hollywood. But the backstory is very simple. In 1953, the U.S. government, mostly the Central Intelligence Agency, went into Iran and they overthrew the democratically elected government of Mohammad Mossadegh, and they installed the Shah of Iran. And that was done to basically get access to Iran's oil for American and British petroleum companies at reduced cost. And along with the Shah just going along with that deal, the U.S. provided additional assistance training up what was known as the Savak, which was the secret police whose job it was to basically club down anybody who objected to the fact that Iran was being impoverished bit by bit for the benefit of the United States corporations. And their thing sort of hung until 1979 when the Iranian people just reached a flashpoint. And they kicked out the Shah and they put in the Ayatollah. And in order to have some leverage against the United States, they grabbed those American hostages in order to deter a military intervention, which probably would have indeed happened had the hostages not been taken. So the hostages just stayed there. They were well cared for. They were taken care of. And ultimately, President Jimmy Carter tried a rescue mission. That basically failed. And the story there is that it was actually sabotaged by people who wanted to sabotage his presidency. And then when Carter was running for re-election against Reagan, as soon as Reagan was elected, the hostages were released. And there were rumors that there had been some kind of a deal, which ultimately led to the part of the Iran-Contra scandal.
Okay.
Hello. There you are.
All right. Yes. Yep. Well, that was a lot there that led up to that for sure. So I just thought it might have been a more of a provocation, like the Cuban Missile Crisis. People think that the Cuban Missile Crisis was just the Russians were just moving missiles there closer to our borders in Cuba. Well, they don't realize that we were moving missiles over there closer to their borders over there in that region of the world. So, but
our public schools don't teach that part of it. The public schools are always out there indoctrinating little kids that we're the good guys and everybody else are the bad guys.
Yep. I guess that's the American exceptionalism.
Yep, absolutely.
Okay, Mike, thanks.
All right, thanks an awful lot. We're going to let you go. We're going to do a shout-out to our on-air affiliates who are just now rejoining our network. And I don't know what happened with YouTube, but I'll have to look at that later today and see what's going on. If I'm reading the error message correctly, the streaming server at YouTube has gone down. So hopefully it'll be back up tomorrow here. There's been an interesting development in the death of the reporter Jamal Khashoggi. And basically, President Erdogan is claiming that Turkey had handed over an audio recording of the journalist's murder inside the Istanbul consulate to the United States, Saudi Arabia, Germany, France, and Britain. And so Khashoggi's last words have come on out, and it was basically, I'm suffocating, take this bag off my head, I'm claustrophobic. Now, the reason this is significant is not because of his words, but because France is denying that they've received this tape and are questioning whether the tape actually exists at all. We have not heard from the other nations. And so this is increasing the friction between France and Turkey. And Turkey is calling the French statements on the Khashoggi tapes unacceptable. All right, we're going to take another phone call. This is from Keith in Montana. Aloha, Keith. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
I just want to expound upon what you were just saying there, Mike. Good afternoon to you, anyway. There was another story to that. There was video released of those hostages talking about how the Iranians kept watching their watches, and this was that pre-cut deal, and this is where the Israelis gave the arms to, in the arms transfer to Iran because the U.S. had an arms embargo on them, and that shouldn't be omitted from the story. But like I say, this was pre-planned, like you mentioned there, that probably trying to oust Carter to get Reagan in there.
Oh, absolutely, no question about that. And of course, it was all tangled up with Adnan Khashoggi, who was, definitely part of the broker of that deal. So,
what gets me is, Mike, is when you look around the world and I read a lot of Israeli paper news. So when you look at all the arms trading, whether it's Myanmar down to Honduras, all this, usually Israel is selling arms down to places that the United States has arms embargoes on, but it's fueling the crime as well as the massive genocides. I used to email with Noam Chomsky, and he spoke to me about the arms sales for the Rwanda and genocides down in Guatemala, all through Israeli arms, and the personnel was trained at the School of Americas. But the whole thing's been shady ever since, and you have to think about the amount of death that has been caused through these arms deals, and that's why I get upset when you listen to Rand Paul talking to Wolf Blitzer, and all he cares about is the jobs for the arms industry, and then even Reagan, when it came to this journalist allegedly being hacked up there, Trump gets out there and says the first thing that he didn't want to jeopardize these arms sales to Saudi Arabia.
Yeah.
It's all arms.
It's all money.
Yeah, it's all money.
It's all money.
And it doesn't benefit the people.
No, of course it doesn't benefit the people. I mean, if the armaments industry was shut down, we could find jobs for all those people, fixing our roads, our rails, our bridges, our dams, cleaning up the dead brush underneath all the forests in this country. I mean, the California wildfires show that this country is being allowed to basically die of neglect. And you're right. The entire focus is all about war and the weapons of war and the money that can be made from them, because weapons are a big ticket item. They're high markup. The profits are absolutely immense because the market is tightly controlled. There's no competition. And you're right. Israel is very much caught up in it. And they also sell weapons that they've acquired from us to people who don't like us, who are then able to reverse engineer and study what's going on inside. So it's a crooked situation. I mean, think about, arms dealers, big pharmaceutical, they're kind of both up there in terms of how sleazy they are.
Yeah, I was reading, I think it was the Times of Israel there, that, and Americans should pay attention to this. Congress approved $700 million for the Iron Dome system, and then another additional $225 million. And then Israel's turned around selling the Iron Dome, where they've made $3 billion off it in sales to New Zealand and South Korea and other places. The issue that really irks me is as you see millions of starving and homeless, for $30 billion, which is how much less than what the Pentagon's annual budget is, they could cure world hunger.
Yes.
But you are supposed to feel guilty for everything and send your $19 a month or just 61 cents a day to help out.
Well, that's actually a very clever bit of propaganda, when they're putting up these commercials about save the children in other countries. They're trying to sell you the message that as bad as things are here in the United States, we're still the best country in the world, and, our kids are okay. And of course, they make a lot of money off of this. But that's the propaganda there. They're trying to remind you every place else is worse. So stay where you are, send in your money, and everything will be fine.
Yeah, and it's like the Allied terror bombings, which were so common to World War II, where you had millions on the road fleeing. You have war refugees fleeing all these illegal wars, and that's exactly the same cause.
Exactly.
Anyway, you have a good day, Mike. Okay?
All right, thanks an awful lot. Okay, getting on over into the Koreas. The Koreas are still moving ahead on what appears to be a path toward reunification. They just dismantled 22 guard posts on the demilitarized zone. And interestingly enough, on the National Geographic channel last night, they were streaming all these programs about the Koreas and North Korea. And one of them was sort of a tour, if you will, by former Monty Python member Michael Palin. And showing the North Korean people who look happy and, they don't look like they're suffering or anything like that. And it was followed by another show that basically went into a lot of detail about how the Koreas have been trying to reunify for quite a long time. But there's always something that happens at the last minute to basically put the kibosh on the deal. And I think that's what's going to happen here. A lot of people are looking at the slowdown in the talks between the United States and North Korea as indicating that the Kim Jong-un, Donald Trump deal is in serious trouble. So anyway. All right, the phone lines are open, and let's make some room there. Interesting little article coming out of Antonio Sequinas. Mike Pompeo and John Bolton, Trump's tag team of death and destruction, and boy, do they have that one right. And the article starts off talking, first of all, about how it's good that UN Ambassador Nikki Haley is leaving. She was a warmonger. She was always up there. She liked that part of the job. And so Mike Pompeo and John Bolton are out there carrying the war agenda around the world. Let's see. Pompeo and Bolton were dutifully carrying forth Haley's promise of mayhem to anyone opposed to U.S. hegemony, even if those enemies have never taken hostile action against the U.S. mainland. Of course, that's something that is a common feature looking back over the last 17 years. The U.S. is doing all the attacking, invading, and drone striking and bombing, but nobody's attacked us. We're attacking countries who have not done anything to us. So we know who the aggressor is. Apparently, out at the Navy's 7th Fleet, the problems never stopped there. They had an F-18 Hornet, had a mechanical problem and crashed into the Philippine Sea. They've launched a rescue mission. Apparently, the two-man crew were picked up by rescue aircraft and taken back to the ship. So, China is now selling an unmanned stealth fighter jet fitted with AK-47 rifles, and this is targeting the military drone race with the United States, and it's called the CH-7. It's a charcoal gray UAV. It was unveiled at China's huge air show, and it's basically the length of a tennis court with a 72-foot wingspan, and it can fly at more than 500 miles an hour at an altitude of 42,650 feet. And I got to tell you, that is very, very impressive. Now, more of the items that were debuted at the air show included the missiles that will be used for the J-20 stealth fighter. And they had 2 of these J-20s there at the air show. They opened their cargo bay doors and revealed the 4 missiles in its fuselage and one on either side of the aircraft. Top Chinese officials, according to the Global Times, said the demonstration displayed the J-20 superiority to the top U.S. fighter jets, the F-22 and the F-35. Well, Technically, we're not really going to know that until they mix it up a little tiny bit, although we know the F-22 and the F-35 have got some serious issues. The F-35 still isn't complete. They're already putting them out there into conflict zones. It's still not complete. I don't think they ever solved the problem with the F-22 where it was asphyxiating its own pilots. I've never heard a follow-up on that. Okay, over in Turkey, they've announced a successful test of what they're calling the Sapan. This is a railgun, hypervelocity weapon, and this makes the number of countries developing these electromagnetic kinetic weapons 4. Russia, U.S., China, I'm sorry, 5. Russia, U.S., China, and India. Okay, we're coming up here on a commercial break, and the phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. And again, the phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. So we were talking about how Turkey has now joined a very exclusive club with an electromagnetic kinetic weapon. And it's basically, it's a rail gun that simply shoots a metal dart at hypersonic speeds. So the latest little toy for them to play with here. Meanwhile, over in Russia, their super nuke Avangard that travels at 20 times the speed of sound will be deployable next year. So the vehicle launches atop an ICBM and then glides across the top of the atmosphere towards its target. And we have seen videos over on YouTube of a very obvious transatmospheric vehicle. And apparently the Avangard has advanced countermeasure systems that allow it to skirt around missile defense systems. And they're talking about the enhanced maneuverability, saying it makes them almost impossible to track. It makes them impossible to hit based on the current U.S. doctrine of missile defense. All right. Now, as you know, today is the commemoration of Veterans Day. Yesterday was Veterans Day, the 100th anniversary of the end of World War I. And you know something? It's been a century. And there are still places that you can go in Europe where the scars of the trenches from the trench warfare are still visible. They're still visible. And there are still places where there are remnants of the German chemical weapons that were used. Anyway, bringing us up to date here, our veterans, our current veterans who were supposed to honor yesterday and today, they haven't received their GI Bill benefits for months. Apparently, there is an ongoing IT issue at the VA. And we have been talking before about the VA, which they're not doing the job. They are really not doing a good job for our people in uniform. Whether you agree with the wars or not, and I certainly do not, I think we all agree that as a nation, there is a debt of honor owed to everybody who put on that uniform, took the oath, did what they were told to do. They're living with the aftermath of realizing what it was really all about. And some of them have suffered grievous injury, and they need to be looked after. They need to be taken care of. One of the aspects of the homeless crisis that really annoys me is how many veterans who served in these wars are now themselves homeless and living on the streets. All right, we're going to take a phone call here. James in Tokyo. James, welcome to the show. I'm probably going to have to take you through the next commercial break.
Oh, that's okay, Mike. I'll get over it after a few months of therapy.
Okay.
You got to stop talking about California's mismanagement of the forest. Everybody knows that it's all caused by global warming that caused the forest to instantly combust.
Yeah, I'm waiting for somebody to come on out and make that claim. I mean, they've already said, well, global warming created the problem because it made the trees grow faster, and there was more dead brush, and it just dried it on out. Yeah, and no matter what happens in this country, it is seized upon for its political value to push an agenda.
Well, Governor Brown already came out and said it was because of global warming. He shirked all his responsibility. It's terrible what happened over there.
It is.
About the F-35.
It really is.
You talk about that. I just want to talk quickly about the F-35.
Okay, go ahead.
I'm not a pilot, but I do have a glider's license, by the way, that I recently got because a squadron leader in Japan at the Ministry of Self-Defense, who was my client and introduced me to many clients, made me join his club. I asked him about the F-35, and that's not the main plane that he used to fly. Now he's a politician now, but
yeah,
he told me. But I'm just saying, just from what I've heard from him, he said that it's an excellent plane, and that everybody wants to do it. Everybody wants to fly it. So I don't really know. I'm just telling you just what I heard. So I have no idea actually if it's a good plane or not. But just wanted to tell you what I heard from somebody. And
well,
finally,
from what you describe of this guy, it sounds to me like he's not really in a position to know, not having either flown it himself or peeked under the hood. And he may be simply going from the very glowing descriptions that are being put out in the military news. Anyway, listen, I got to take another commercial break here. Stay on the line. Going to come right back to you after these few words. America, welcome back to the show here. And we're talking with James in Tokyo. And at the moment, we're talking about the F-35. And over the commercial break, I went out on a search engine and simply searched the phrase F-35 problems. And it's just page after page after page after page. It's a boondoggle. There's no other way to describe it. And I shudder to think what's going to happen the first time it actually goes into real combat and it gets shot down. Because that means the sales will evaporate right there. The whole point of the F-35... Go ahead.
Okay, Mike, I should have clarified myself better. He did fly it. He did say it was reliable, but what you were saying is when they would do exercises, when China's planes might invade Japan's airspace, that's not the plane that they want to use because it's not a winner. But he just said it's a fun plane. It's a fun plane to ride, and it's reliable, but it's not really good for combat. That's just what I was told. But I just want to
that sounds a lot more in line with what I'm seeing on all these stories. I mean, we know that it's a terrible dogfighter, and it's underpowered. It's been just loaded up with gadgets, so it's very, very heavy. And I imagine with all the whiz-bang gadgets, it would be fun to fly. But again, is it really going to be effective in combat? And I've noticed that ever since Syria got those S-300s, that Israel has kept their F-35s firmly on the runway.
They sure have. Hey, Mike, I want to talk about the economy briefly.
Sure.
I was just reading an article on, I can't remember, it was Investment Watch Blog or Zero Hedge, one of those two, that they're closing 50 lows, home, the home centers. And
yes.
A lot of my personal investments, I kind of like to base on home sales because that's, I think, the most genuine sign of how an economy is doing. And for some reason, a lot of Americans, they say, are getting a lot of jobs, but I don't think they're counting, the 100 million people that were out of work. And I'm getting kind of apprehensive now about investing because I think this could be again, 2008, because you're seeing oil go down, I mean, it broke 60 the other day, and now it's up because the Saudis cutting production. But I'm getting this really bad feeling again that it might be time for me to get my butt out of the market. What do you think?
I would say so too, because apparently the Federal Reserve has announced that they are not going to slow down their rate hikes. And as of today, the Dow Jones ended 600 points down. And so if I actually had investment capital to be working with, I'd be investing it in canned foods and shotguns.
Well, I needed income, but my stuff pretty much held up good. Just the refinery and the private prisons, but a lot of stuff. It was a terrible market day, and anyway, thank you for your input. Oh, Mike, by the way, how's that harp playing Angel's back doing? Is it getting any better?
Very slowly. It's very frustrating for her, but she is getting better. We have to just be very careful with her. I keep her wrapped up in bubble wrap all the time so that she doesn't bang into the walls. And it's actually been a while since she's played the harp, but I imagine at some point soon she's going to ask me to tune it up so she can get her hands around it. Mostly, though, she sits in her office working on her music, for her church, her two church choirs.
Well, she's a great composer, and send her my best. And my best to you, and thank you for taking my call, Michael.
Oh, well, thank you very much. And we're going to let you go here and switch over to Art off the grid. Aloha, Art. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Mike. There's no doubt in my mind that these fires out there in California are due to terrible land management. I mean, you take where I live out here in the middle of nowhere, Georgia, and surrounded by thousands and thousands and thousands of acres of forests and such as that. But we don't have that problem because, we do, every 3, 4, 5 years, someone's doing a controlled burn to burn off all that brush so that we don't have a problem with wildfires. But let's just say, for the sake of argument, let's play stupid here and say that these fires are due to global warming. Okay, well, if that be the case, and the caravans from Honduras and all that are coming up here to escape global warming, guess what? They're not going to stop in the United States. They're going to keep going.
Yep. Like I said, if they're really coming up here to escape global warming, I think we ought to set up the tent cities for them up in Barrows, Alaska.
There you go. Anyway, I just had to throw that out because it's how stupid the argument is.
Yeah, it really is. And again, we have become just as politicized as a nation as the former Soviet Union, again, just before it all fell apart. And there's nothing that can happen anywhere that is not seized on by various individuals and groups and politicized to push whatever agenda they're going to do, whether it's a baker refusing to make a gay wedding cake, or it's the wildfires out in California, or any of this stuff. The nation really is in a sorry state where it's almost like truth and facts and the unbiased sharing of information. It's not a factor any longer. It's just nothing but spin. We are up to our noses in spin every day of our lives.
Well, I'll leave you with one final thought when you talk about truth and facts, and this, I think, should be the left's new motto. Do not confuse me with the facts. My mind is already made up. Thanks, Mike.
Oh, I've been hearing that one for a very, very, very long time. Okay, and let's see. Getting on back here to the economic news. Now, as you know, Donald Trump threatened SWIFT, the electronic funds transfer system, with sanctions unless they cut off Iran's central bank. And SWIFT basically caved on in, and they unplugged from Iran's central bank. Meanwhile, Tehran has sold 700,000 barrels of their oil to anonymous direct buyers. So they're still selling oil and they're still getting something of value for it. Now, countries that are really getting sick of all the U.S. sanctions, and by the way, this movement against Iran is only going to accelerate the de-dollarization of the world. So there are these countries saying, well, we need a trade mechanism to get around these sanctions. And France and Germany are apparently being considered as the locations to host the Iranian payment vehicle to get around the U.S. sanctions. And of course, France and Germany are risking U.S. sanctions by doing this themselves. And anyway, okay, as you know, they just had a big confab over in Paris. Everybody showed up. It was to commemorate the 100th anniversary of the end of World War I. Macron said a lot of things that angered a lot of people. He tried to bash the Russians, forgetting that the Russians were on our side for both of these previous two world wars here. And he came on out with a very bizarre statement saying that nationalism is treason. And of course, Macron is a globalist. And he said, we've all got to work together. We've all got to, have our common moral values. And he praised the world leaders that formed the first League of Nations after World War I, which of course utterly failed to prevent World War II. Just like the United Nations, formed after World War II, does not seem to be doing a good job keeping us away from nuclear Armageddon. All right, we're going to take another phone call. This is Milton in Pennsylvania. To the show, what's on your mind?
Yeah, Mike, the last 2 days on your website, I've been having problems, and it just now occurred. My browser that I had, your YouTube video went to some Christian YouTube video, and then I put you into Yandex, and I got you on Republic Broadcasting, but it won't let me get to your site.
Well, I'm able to see my site from here, and as a matter of fact, my YouTube feed is down right now. About 15 minutes into the show, the server at YouTube stopped responding, and I don't know where the issue is. It could be something having to do with Spectrum. It's actually been taking it's very slow getting the websites on the mainland, so there may be an issue with the cable or something.
Yeah,
as far as
I'm sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say, as far as a video in the archive going over to some Christian video, that's clearly a problem with the archive. You're talking about YouTube, right?
Yeah, it did that like it was recycling, and then that came up, and so I went to Yandex. Yandex has no problem at all.
Well, as I said before, YouTube is clearly having some kind of issues today. Because, again, our streaming server is down. And I don't know how many people are actually watching that. It may be more trouble than it's really worth to try and keep that thing going.
Well, I like to see your face once in a while. You're popular.
Well, just go down to the post office and look at all my wanted posters.
There you go. Another thing, too. Did you see all them people protesting Mexico when they said they weren't going to continue that airport?
They weren't going to continue what?
The Mexicans wanted an airport built, and as far as I understand,
yes,
they're a third way done, and the government says, well, we're not going to do it, and they're all out in the streets protesting, and that's just over an airport. We got a country falling apart with a system that won't let us vote who we want. We should all be rising like that, peacefully.
I agree. Especially as this voting debacle unfolds. I'm hoping the American people are paying attention to this, and I'm calling on all you Rivero's Rangers to rub everybody's nose in just how bad this is. Because if we're not actually voting for the government, then we have no obligation to them. The contract is broken. And We need, as a first step to regaining control of this country, we need an honest, open, fair election system. And again, I've got an article up at whatreallyhappened.com. It's right under my picture. How to have honest elections. Please send that around. And just say, in light of what's been going on in Texas and Georgia and Indiana and California and New Mexico, and especially in Florida, it is time for the American people to demand a return to verifiable paper ballot elections.
Well, I wish I had a thought in mind. I was going to try to find out across the country who all the Republican senators are and all, and give them all a call and ask them, get off your duff and start, doing your job. I think if enough of us called and let them know we're sick, maybe they'll do something.
Well, I think that would be a good thing to do, but you might call up all those Republicans, members of the House, senators, and governors who were told they lost by a razor-thin margin and say, you need to look at what's going on down in Florida, and you need to demand a recount. And, just go to court and say, this election system is unverifiable, and it is too easy to tamper with, and we're seeing fraud all over the country, massive vote fraud all over the country. And I do think that these Democrats, especially the ones who go to bed the victor in the election, and then the next day they find out that there was a miraculous come from behind victory.
Yeah. Well,
okay.
I used to be a Democrat, but I refuse to report the Commucrats anymore. So we just want a fair game. Thank you, Mike.
All right. Thanks an awful lot, Milton. We're going to let you go. And boy, we're sure having our share of technical issues here today. All righty. So, yeah. It's all over the country. It's not just Florida this time. It is everywhere. Okay, let's go on out and talk about the shooting at the Borderline Bar and Grill in Thousand Oaks. And between that and the fires, Thousand Oaks is definitely, they've had a rough week here. It was in another gun-free zone. 12 murdered, 18 injured. Shooter was a former Marine with demonstrated psychological problems. And here is where we start talking about mismanagement. Because California has a law that could have prevented the Thousand Oaks shooting, and it wasn't used. Now, back in 2014, California passed a law that said they called it the red flag law. If they saw a behavior in somebody that thought that could lead to violence, they would separate them from the firearms. And they didn't do it. And neighbors had reported hearing loud arguments at the home that this guy shared with his mother. Apparently, he'd actually damaged the walls inside. And the police had come on out earlier in the year and just decided that, he was having issues. And again, the question I want asked is, what medications was this guy on? Because I keep going back to that Facebook post that one of Long's friends looked at and said, this doesn't sound like this guy at all. I want to know what medications the VA had put him on for his PTSD. I think we all have a right to know that. All right, we're going to take another break for commercials. Phone lines are open, 800-313-9443, and we will be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. Now, over at the United Nations, they've got this International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, which most member states have ratified. And it includes, of course, a right to life clause. But a committee of experts who are given the job of interpreting this for us on our behalf is saying that the right to life now includes a right to abortion. And so this committee is now saying that all governments, all member nations of the United Nations must decriminalize abortion in all circumstances and remove existing barriers that deny effective access by women and girls to safe and legal abortion, including barriers caused as a result of the exercise of conscientious objection by individual medical providers. And this is all coming out of this committee here. Now, the reason I felt like mentioning this, again, the United Nations sees itself as part of the emerging one world government. And I don't know if you've ever heard of the Georgia Guidestones, but you can bring up a search engine and go on over there. And it's this stone monument that was put up, I think about 20 years ago, something like that. And it's just off the side of a road in Georgia. And it looks kind of like a Stonehenge wannabe. And it has instructions for the future of humanity carved on it in 12 different languages, one of which is that the human population needs to be limited to below 500 million. Now, right now, birth rates are actually very, very low, but they want to accelerate the process by saying, yeah, just abort away. Right to life applies to the mother. That blob of protoplasm inside, that's not alive yet. Mahi dictum est. Okay, let's take some phone calls now. Ed, aloha, Ed. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Aloha, Mike. I just wanted to talk about some of the red flag laws, especially the ones they just implemented in the former free state of Florida. When you take a look at it in detail, it just runs around the Fourth Amendment. Any family member, any law official can just say a disgruntled wife or a husband or a cousin or a family can go to a judge and say, I'm in fear of my life. I want you to take these guns away, and there is no probable cause anymore. It's just, and the other thing is, Mike, you can't confront the person or persons who brought up these charges. And if you're found not guilty, you have to pay costs to go back to court and get your weapons back. I mean, there were more guns in the 1980s. Long story short, we did not have this kind of violence as we did today. I think there's something behind it.
The difference is the medication. Okay, stay on the line. I'm going to keep you to the station break, and we'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. We're still talking with Ed. We're talking about the red flag laws, and unfortunately, anytime you try and do something with a positive outcome, it's going to get abused. I mean, take a look at how the internet itself has become a haven for cyber criminals and bullies and abusers, and it reveals something very dark about human nature, and to me signals that since I was a kid, there has been a decline in the morality of the American people, where today's morality is gimme, gimme, gimme. I want free stuff. And again, the empowerment of being able to hurt people, often anonymously.
You know, Mike, we have more crime in the inner cities than we do, let's say, in the suburbs, in the state I'm calling from. And yet there's no call to action of any governor, any mayor, to send in the National Guard and disarm MS-13, the Crips or the Bloods or whatever gang that's holding, neighborhoods hostage. There just isn't. It's only when you have a mass shooting done by white people that it seems it makes press. More people died on 4th of July in Chicago, probably in that mass shooting, one weekend. And where was the news regarding that? Because they were blacks, it didn't matter? Or is there
no, there's definitely a bias. I mean, our entire culture right now is going down the path of Zimbabwe, South Africa, and Namibia, where white people are being openly discriminated against. And of course, that's something the Democrats have been selling for quite a long time. That everything that's gone wrong with the country is the fault of white heterosexual males. the media is selling that idea that all the racial violence in the streets is being caused by white people. You're right. When there's racial violence being carried out by non-white people, like Antifa, it's treated as being, if it's reported on at all, it's treated as justified payback, revenge. And there really is an anti-white male bias in our society, and I find it very, very troubling.
I find it troubling that my children and grandchildren will live in a society that will resemble South Africa, let's say a generation from now. The white birth rate has dropped to almost the point where we're not reproducing anymore, and we're allowing in people with IQs of below 70, especially from Somalia, into our country without being properly vetted, and Trump's not done a damn thing in my book to stop it. After all, I did vote on borders, I did vote on a fence, and I did vote on mass deportation of criminals. Yet none of this has happened. It's just like, come on over to America, shoot up as many people as you want. Nothing's going to happen to you. Come rob, pillage, rape, whatever you want to do. It's a land of plenty. But my question goes a little bit further. What happens when the well runs dry, Mike, when there's no more money? I mean, there are no more white people producing money as they were back in the 70s and 80s when we were still one of the richest countries in the world. Everyone's on welfare. Everyone's on Social Security disability. Everyone's got a handout from the government. It used to be a time when you had 16 people for every one person on Social Security. Now I think it's like 1-to-1 or 2-to-1. And now that we have welfare, we've become a state where anyone can come here, automatically get welfare. And those who were born in this country, raised in this country, fought, and worked in we don't get the same things. Veterans I've known since childhood still are waiting for their pensions, or waiting for them to turn 65 so they could try to eke out a living. And yet you get people coming over from everywhere, just automatically put on Social Security, anything they can get for vote Democrat. Just vote Democrat. And I honestly believe this will be the last time we'll have a Republican governor in my lifetime. It's just too close. The ballots are just, Broward County.
If the Democrats get away with it this time, if the American people don't stand up and make a stink about it, from now on, the Democrats are just going to cheat because they know they can get away with it. They're very good at it. They've been doing it for decades. The Republicans don't seem to want to fight back on that issue. Of course, part of the problem is that the Democratic leadership, they're all people of color, minorities, women, gay, and anytime a Republican stands up to criticize one of them, you're being racist, you're being, sexist, you're being this and that. People who are talking about, Brenda Snipes doing a clearly fraudulent election down there in Florida are being smeared in the corporate media for being woman haters or racist. And it's the way the Democratic Party has evolved to be. And it's going to take a major event to break out of this cycle, which is why I'm saying that the best outcome that I could see for this country is a Soviet Union style collapse and a complete rebuild from the ground up. Starting with our current Constitution, the first 13 amendments, and we just say right from the start, those career politicians from the last mess up, they're the reason we had all of this. They are automatically excluded from taking part in the new government.
The ancient Spartans used to judge politicians at the end of their terms to see whether or not they did a good job or not. Those who did a good job survived. Those who did not were, they didn't live to see another day. I'm in favor for that. It may sound antiquated, but when you have lifelong politicians who go on virtually poor, come out multi-millionaires, something's wrong. They don't listen to their constituents anymore. They don't even campaign anymore. My congressman...
No, they listen to the big money. They go to the Sheldon Adelsons and the George Soroses, and they just, rack up millions and millions of dollars, and they're selling the country out to the billionaires.
Well, it's lobbyists, whether it's AIPAC or whether it's Guns of America. I think, personally, all lobbyists should be banned from at least 10 miles from the Congress. I mean, they have no place being there to begin with. But, we allow it to happen. We just do. And it's a shame.
Yeah. When this country was originally designed by the Founding Fathers, they did a very good job. There were certain things they did not anticipate and couldn't anticipate. But the basic principle was that the authority and power was spread across the country, that all of those states were separate sovereign entities that had authority over everything that happened internal to their borders. And the centralized federal government was to act as an arbitrator between the separate states, and in time of war would come up with an army. But it was
that ended pretty much after that pretty much ended after the Civil War, though, when a lot of the southern states were forced back into the Union.
Oh, yeah. If you go study the Constitution, you look at all those amendments that were passed right after the Civil War, and you see the entire structure of the nation completely redone, where even the separate states that had been on the Union side paid a heavy price for the Civil War in terms of loss of their sovereignty, loss of independence. The federal government saw an opportunity to really expand itself, and it took advantage of it.
I finally took a good read of the Considered Constitution. It seems more to the Founding Fathers' thoughts than the Constitution we had after 1870. It really does. I mean, a president had 1 6-year term, which is good. You're not spending hundreds of millions of dollars for re-election. And where is that money coming from? How many billions were spent this year just for the midterms alone? I heard $5 billion plus. You know how many poor people that could feed, Mike? How many American citizens could at least have a comfortable living off of $5 billion?
Yep. But no, the billionaires they've warped our system to where money talks. President Trump demonstrated that by giving the Medal of Freedom to a donor's wife. It just makes a travesty out of the whole thing. The government is for sale. We're open for business. They should just put,
it's really good. There's some good videos out there about, I hate to say going back to the guns. That's the only thing that's kept us pretty much free, unlike old Rhodesia and South Africa and in Eastern Europe. Once they start chipping away at our constitutional rights to bear arms, there's Second Amendment's gone. All 13, 14 amendments are gone. There's no constitution left. We live in a communist society. But, going back to who should have guns, I mean, who decides that? A psychiatrist when you apply for one? Certain states like Florida, they're very constitutional, but that's going to change soon once we get a Democrat governor in here.
Well, I mean, the Second Amendment has already been watered down. There are all these laws limiting the kind of weapons that ordinary citizens can have, even though the Supreme Court has ruled on more than one occasion that because of that militia clause in the Second Amendment reserves to the American people exactly the same kind of military weapons being held by the uniformed forces. And the reason for that, of course, obviously, is to allow the American people to give the government a good reason to be polite, mind its business. But with all these laws about limiting magazines and, I would expect we're probably going to see a situation like they have in some other countries where you can own a gun, but you have to store it at a gun club where it's under lock and key, and you have to go on down there, use it at the club, and not bring it home, which, of course, undermines the whole thing of being able to defend your home with a firearm, which is something a lot of people have to do every single year, more than 1.5 million.
I'm sorry, but my younger son's wife is from Jamaica, and they're only allowed something like 100 rounds for their shotgun a year, or is it 200 rounds? I forget the number, but it's a low amount. They're only allowed shotguns, and most of the people there, they hunt to live.
Yes.
And I'm I'm wondering how long it's going to take for the Democrats to say, well, you no longer need, okay, semi-automatics, okay, we'll get rid of magazines, even with a pistol, go back to a six-shooter. Well, you really don't need 6 bullets in a gun. I mean, where does it end? I don't know. Because, here in the state I'm in, you can go out and buy a .50 caliber. If you've got $15,000 with you and are willing to pay $100 per round, you could do it. A lot of states, like from New Jersey, where I originally came from, you had to go to your chief of police and you had to apply for it, and it would take up to 6 months, depending on whether he wanted to hand them out or not, to get your firearms license. Certain states don't do that, which is why I moved to the South, and I see the South becoming the North. And where the hell else are we going to go? I mean, I'm just looking to protect my family from the day that things do go south. And, bow and arrow is not going to do it, in my opinion.
Well, we're going to have to use what we've got available to us. Now, the reality is, I recognize that I am too old, and I'm feeling the symptoms of being old. I'm never going to be in the trenches or on the front lines of any kind of a military conflict. And even if I was able to do something like that, I still think it's a bad idea.
Oh, I
understand a lot of people disagree with me.
I want to see peace. I want to see my children and grandchildren live in peace and harmony and have a better life than I had, but I don't see that better life anymore. I don't. And with the violence escalating, as you said, it is escalating as years go by.
It is.
It's not going to get any better. I mean, what do you do? I mean, I try to tell my children to love one another as, you love yourself. I mean, after all, that's probably one of the greatest commandments out there. But not everybody lives by that. And there's certain sections of town you can't even walk through anymore.
Getting back to the violence, which now that the midterms are over, seems to have abated, at least temporarily. And but it is a situation, brown shirt tactics being used against conservatives. I've seen other writers basically say that similar kind of jingoism-driven violence was basically happening prior to our Civil War. So it does look like we're heading in a bad direction. Anyway, listen, Ed, I need to let you go. The phone lines are loading up. I've got
thanks a lot, Mike. God bless, and talk to you soon.
All right, thanks an awful lot. We're going to switch over to Chris in Las Vegas. Chris, thank you for being so patient. What's on your mind today?
Well, a couple of things, if you don't mind, Michael. I thank you for being there today on Veterans Day, Armistice Day, and whatever else they want to call it. But I want to take a precise and distinct exception between this ludicrous absurdity and preposterosity of pretextually assuming and presuming that the right to life incorporates the insane concept that you can murder babies and call it abortion and have it equally the same basis whatsoever. It is absolutely absurd and ludicrous.
I agree. I absolutely agree. And, I understand that, the human population is large and is growing, and that's because sex is a lot more fun than dying. But how it's going to eventually work out, I mean, we're heading into a major war that tends to thin down the population. They're worried about Ebola in Africa actually getting off the continent now. They're concerned that it's actually going to spread over to Uganda. So something could eventually happen. I just have a real problem with this idea of murdering the unborn to make life more comfortable for those people who've already been around for 20 or 30 years. And again, I acknowledge there are circumstances under which abortion is medically necessary, severe birth abnormality, cases of rape or incest. Where I am uncomfortable is where women want to go around saying, I'm not that type of girl, and they're not taking precautions, and then they have a few too many, and they wind up discovering they are that type of girl. And they just go to the doctor and say, get rid of it for me. It's retroactive birth control. I do have a problem with that.
Well, let's call it the genetic embedded imprint to replicate is put there by the Creator for a purpose, and it's to replenish the earth, as we're counseled. And so absolving yourself of personal liability for your own actions is a pretty broadly general vain claim of exonerating yourself by murdering one of God's creations to preserve your own character or lack of dignity. It's just insane. If I might shift gears and bring something this Armistice Day that's very important, there's a case called, in fact, there's two cases. One of them's called Latif, Latif versus Holder. The other one is a little complicated. It's Ibrahim versus the Department of Justice, the TSA. And these cases speak to the very dangerous concept that there's any reliability whatsoever on these so-called government-maintained security databases of the TSA, Department of Homeland Security, FBI, or DOJ, because of the fatally unsound policies that they call oversight and assurance of accuracy, because their overseers appear to be preoccupied with other activities, perhaps perusing the internet for porn videos or other interest of their own self-interest, and thereby they are not doing their job to be sure that people who are wrongly, with no fact-specific basis whatsoever, like myself, placed upon the terrorist watch hit list or the do not fly list specifically. One of them is do not fly, the other is the terrorist watch list, and many Middle Easterners, as well as American former military people, have been unlawfully. In fact, they speak in April of, I think it was 2009, they had over 9,000 wrong people placed on the terror watch list. And that's just one instance on one day. And myself being victimized, and you were speaking about red flag.
Okay, Chris, I'm going to have to put you on hold. Chris, stay on hold. Got to take a break for commercials. I'll come right back to you after these words from our sponsors. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. We're still talking with Chris in Las Vegas. And Chris, you were telling us about, I guess it was these two lawsuits.
Well, I was, and even more importantly, I was in the DCF's court here, the Department of Child and Family Services, Child Protective Services here in Las Vegas, about a month ago with my former bride, who apparently by the FBI was either co-opted, coerced, threatened, terrorized, or bribed to tell lies about me and claim that she was in fear for my life and have my gun seized and my home unlawfully searched. Myself, I was unlawfully arrested, unlawfully detained, violently attacked 2 different times in court, and in psychiatric evaluation assessment for dangerousness, not because of what I do, but because of what I know. My knowledge and study in law and exposing some of the tactics of the bar trade has put me in a target position. And so while she was on the stand, the salient question that was the smoking gun that was asked was, how did she happen to know that I was trying to get my guns back when she had no first-party competent knowledge? The judge asked her, and she says, well, the FBI called me up, and they suggested that I should get this temporary restraining order extension on the one that was expired back in January of 2018 to preclude him from getting his guns back. Well, thankfully, the judge, Amy Matson, had the good conscience to tell her that this was not terrorism, this was not stalking, and that if the FBI didn't want me to have my guns back, they were going to have to figure it out on their own, because that court was not going to be involved in it. And it was just too bad. And they found for me the adversary in that particular case, although I'm still working on having them turn over the original one when I had no due process of law, no substantial justice, because I was locked up in maximum security for 31 days under a false arrest and not invited to attend to defend while I was in maximum security, therefore obstructed from all substantial justice and all American due process of land law here in America. and did not get to defend myself. And this is the dangerous hazard of these agency actions. The FBI, there are many good people in the FBI, don't misunderstand me, that love America, but there are many embedded Obamaite, Saul Alinsky agents that are still in that organization that are defiling it, and like Rob the Rat Rosenstein. We thank them for Bill Pre-Straps and others that have some love of America here that try to protect this country, but these anti-American terrorists that are embedded within are very dangerous to America and to Trey Gowdy's favorite institutions. So thank you so very, very much, Michael. Happy Veterans Day to you, and God bless America.
All right, well, thanks an awful lot. We're going to switch on over to Joe in Rhode Island. Aloha, Joe. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Mike. Can you hear me, Mike?
You're on the air.
Okay. In the Providence Journal, in Providence, Rhode Island, the front page article reads, Francis Macron gives stark warning of demons rising. In the article, it goes on to mention that he was addressing the world leaders, and he said the dangers of nationalism and of nations that put themselves first above the collective good. Collective good sounds like 1917 in Bolshevik Russia.
Yes, it's exactly what it is.
The old demons, now this is what he said about our veterans who died and are maimed and went through hell in Europe. Here's what he said about them. The old demons are rising again, ready to complete their task of chaos and of death, Macron said. Patriotism is the exact opposite of nationalism. Catch that. Yes. Nationalism is a betrayal of patriotism. So patriotism now, in his eyes, is patriotism to the one world government or the global government.
Yes, that's exactly what it is. But that's what Macron is selling there. He's selling the one world government and saying that, yeah, if you're going to be a patriot, you have to be patriot to that one world government. And we can see already how this has not worked out very well, certainly not for the European Union. And you need to study the European Union and realize that everything that's been happening there will happen to the entire world on a much larger scale if they accomplish this idea of bringing down all this nationalist governments and getting their one world rule. It's going to be history's worst dictatorship.
It's going to be, Mike, the philosophy that they had for this New Age movement. All the governments of the world have to be on the same field.
Joe,
economically.
Joe, got to put you on hold here.
Mike.
Don't hang up.
Okay.
Going to come right back to you after these words from our sponsors. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. We're talking with Joe in Rhode Island, and we're talking about globalism and the one world government. And, of course, the idea is nothing new. We have had conquerors throughout history who wanted to conquer the whole place so they could just stand up there and say, hey, I'm a pretty good guy. Alexander the Great, good example. He basically conquered what was known of the world at that time. And then promptly divvied up among his generals when he was dying or being poisoned. We're not really sure about that. Rome wanted to conquer it all. And now, of course, we have the U.S. clearly in a campaign of hegemonic domination of the rest of the world. And all this goes back to the Project for the New American Century in the 1990s, which was setting out these policy papers saying, hey, the U.S. is the only remaining superpower. Let's act like one and just take the place over. Okay, apparently we have lost Joe. So let's switch over to David in California. Aloha, David. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yeah, when you were speaking a little about abortion, about a year or so ago, I was looking for the article. I couldn't find it, but I wrote down some notes. There was about 5 groups that were leftist. One was that were against abortion. One is called secularprolife.org. One is called Life Matters Journal. Radio on, okay. One is called New Wave Feminism. One is called And Then There Were None. And then there's Secular Pro-Life, Democrats for Life of America, Feminists for Nonviolent Choices, and Pro-Life Allies. And one more thing, a bumper sticker says, if the choice is to kill, and the kill is capitalized, if the choice is to kill, then yes, I'm anti-choice. So I just had some notes from a year or so ago. So there is groups on the left that are, they see it as violence, and if it's such a good thing, then we should show the films everywhere. Show films of leftists should show films of abortion because it's so harmless. Yep. And so that's about all I had, Mike.
Yeah. Well, no, absolutely, and I understand that the push for everybody for all these abortions to be available is rooted in this desire to reduce the overall human population, and I understand that would be a good thing. It's just I don't feel that anybody has the right to stand up there and play God just because they've got a lot of money and decide that these people will have children, these will not. These people over here have to live shorter lives. These people over here are going to live longer lives. Anytime I get somebody who's talking to me about what a terrible problem overpopulation is, and I'll say, all right, there's a very tall building right over there. Go up to the top.
There you go.
Jump off.
Yeah, there you
try
go.
and hit a banker on the way down.
I had something. That's a good one. I had something. I say, we'll have a party for you first. We'll cook meals for you and everything. Then go. Okay, leave. Especially the one, and they say no. You need us because we're the environmentalists or whatever. We got to designate who goes, or something like that.
Yeah, we're the liberals. It's all you conservatives that have to go extinct.
I know. Yeah, it's crazy. And what was the other thing? I guess it slipped my mind. That's about it.
Okay, David. Well, thank you very much for the phone call. We're going to let you go, and I understand that we've reconnected with Joe in Rhode Island. Aloha, Joe. Welcome back to the show. And again, we were talking about the globalist agenda and how throughout history, it's an idea that keeps resurfacing time and time again. And it usually winds up being very, very bad for ordinary people who are just trying to live their lives.
Right. The New Age movement, Michael. In times past, publications, their mantra was that all nations have to be on the same keel economically. In other words, they all have to be on an even basis. And that's what Mr. Macron said in his article, above the collective good. So they want this economic system to be equal right across the board, economically. And
the reasoning is simple because unless everybody's economy is ground down to the same level, when they really do drop all the borders, people are going to be running from the poorer areas to the wealthier areas like we've got happening right now in Mexico.
Exactly, yes. So, I mean, it seems as though that agenda is pretty much coming to pass. I mean, years ago, I remember them talking about universal health care. One of the politicians was talking about universal health care on their platform. And it seems like a backdoor coming into that universal health care, what they're doing today.
Yes.
So, I mean, it's they are achieving their goals. So I I tell people to be aware. Knowledge is power. Be aware of what's going on so that you can make the moves to do what you have to do to protect your countries and to at least advise them of what's coming with the globalism, so that you're able to function properly. And,
well, again,
that's about all
yes.
I got to say, Mike. But go ahead, Mike. I'm interested.
The globalists. Yeah, the globalists have been trying to implement their agenda, starting with the European Union and the less well-defined North American Union. But as we can tell in the EU right now, it's not really working out. And I'm sure the people who were planning all of this were just thinking that they were going to drive everybody's economic status down to third world levels, drop the border, and then everybody would just, be kind of friends with each other. Didn't work out. The reality of what all of this globalism and open borders is doing is now apparent in front of everybody's face, and there is a huge pushback. Now we're hearing that Italy is refusing to bow down to Brussels. They may be thinking about making an exit as well, because they have been really hard hit by both the economics of the European Central Bank and that open border refugee crisis.
I just spent a month in Italy, all over, quite a few places in Italy I got around to. And I'll tell you, I had somebody with me that understood Italian and the dialects. And he read me the newspapers of the front page articles, what was going on. And there's battles going on between Italy, Spain, France. They're all pointing the finger at each other. You're not taking enough immigrants in and this and that. And they're all broke. These countries are all broke. Italy is flat broke. They can't afford to take another person in. They're coming in from across the Aegean Sea. They're coming in from all over the place. They're coming in from Romania. They're coming in from Albania. All kind of, and they just can't keep up with it. And of course, they've got free medical for everybody. Even tourists coming over there, they give you free medical. So, I mean, how can they possibly survive that kind of influx and pay for all the bills?
At some point, the system is going to start breaking down. We're going to start seeing clashes in the street between the citizens and the refugees. And a big part of the problem is, even though this clearly is not working, George Soros and his organizations are still out there encouraging it, funding it. They've got people down there in these countries making all kinds of impossible to keep promises. If you can get into Europe, we're going to give you a Ferrari or something like that. And you're absolutely right. The reason Europe is fighting back, at least at the grassroots level, they're out of money. They're out of room. They're watching as their culture is basically getting papered over with all these foreign cultures. There are parts of Germany now where the native Germans are feeling like they're strangers in a strange land.
It's amazing. It's absolutely amazing. What do you think Macron's reason for addressing the world leaders like this and calling the veterans of all the different countries that died there demons, possessed by demons? Why would he do something like that?
I don't think Macron was referring to the veterans themselves. When he said the old demons were rising, he meant the demons of nationalism. He was definitely on the warpath for that. Macron is committed to the New World Order, and he was using this event, Armistice Day, as a stage to push that agenda, and he pushed it as hard as he could.
And what do you think of that, Mike? Do you think that worked? Do you think it was effective? What do you think the other
well, it certainly didn't work on me, and most of the writings I've seen about it are very critical of Macron for basically forgetting what he was supposed to be there for. As far as globalism, I don't think it's ever going to work. And I don't think it's a good idea anyway. I think humanity is best served by a planet Earth with a couple of hundred similar-sized nations with good, solid borders, each looking out for their own interests, trading across the borders, tourism across the borders. But a national border serves the same function as a fireproof door in a building or a watertight bulkhead in a ship. It contains a problem. If you have a one world government and one world economy and no borders anywhere, the first major incident that comes along could bring down civilization. Here's what's really scary. We've got all these people are still out there saying that we've got to tear down the fence with Mexico. These people from Central America, they've got to be let on in. Just let them all on in. What happens if somebody in that crowd just arrived here from the Democratic Republic of the Congo and is not yet symptomatic, but is a carrier of the Ebola virus? What do you do then? That's why we need borders. We need controlled borders. There are some nasty illnesses out there. In fact, another nation in Africa is now dealing with a massive cholera outbreak. Anyway, David, are you there?
Joe. Yeah.
That's right. This is Joe. Okay.
Yeah.
Anything else?
That's it for now, Mike.
All right. Well, thanks an awful lot, Joe. We're going to let you go and switch over to Rhonda in Missouri. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yeah, hi, Mike. The elections are on my mind, and from where I'm sitting, it looks like the children got let go, are playing in the playground of politics. And
yes.
You said earlier that Bill Nelson said, we're letting illegals vote, right? So that's childish behavior.
Well, his lawyers did. His lawyers admitted it. They were there, watching the recount. And then when the judge said these cannot be counted, the lawyers objected.
Mm-hmm. Okay, from where I'm sitting. Okay, it's like they're asking for punishment. It's like what wasn't said, Mike, was. Yeah, illegals are voting. Now, what are you going to do about it? So, what are we going to do about it? I think we should give them two choices. One's a little better than the other. The ones that are caught cheating, we should bring the firing squads back. Or we could just, the ones that are caught cheating, and they won't admit it after this, but we find out that illegals voted in the Democratic election. Well, you can't. It's all a mess right now. You can't recount any votes because it's just a mess. It should just flip on over to the other side. I think they should just give it to the other party. Republicans, Democrats, whoever's caught cheating, and I know Republicans probably cheat too, but it should be given to the other party. And if they can't get along, give it to the independent party.
I would say let's skip the confusion. And if the Republicans and Democrats are caught cheating, hand the election to the independents, kick out those candidates. One of the aspects to my article on how to have an honest election is the idea that we need a zero tolerance policy in our laws, which would be that if a candidate and his campaign are caught cheating, that should be immediately removed from the race, because if a candidate cannot control their own staff and keep them in conformance with the law, then they're by definition unsuited to be managing a city, a county, a state, or the nation.
I'm just in awe that this can even be going on. I'm just sitting here going, what? What? Who's allowing this stuff? I mean, it's insanity. It's just, it makes me crazy. I hate injustice. I don't like injustice. If they won legitimately, fine. Because they're representing their constituents, and apparently more of them wanted that person in office, but they have to go and cheat. And you don't hear of any Republicans cheating this time. That's interesting, isn't it?
The Republicans have never really been all that good at it. In fact, I think after Richard Nixon, I'm sure some has gone along. But the problem with the Democrats is they knew they were fighting an uphill battle going into these midterms. The internal polls were very much against them. So they knew the election fraud was going to have to be massive, and it was going to be visible, and they counted on the corporate media to try and put the best possible spin on it. But the reason they're cheating is very simple. They're not there to represent their constituents. They're there to represent their financial backers. And the financial backers want them to win at all costs. Do what you need to do to get into office, because that's what I gave you my money for. And it is a totally corrupted system here.
It's disgusting, and it needs to be stopped. They need a deterrent, really. That is what's lacking. If you get caught cheating in politics, firing squad or you're gone. We'll give you the choice. You can get the heck out and never come back. Or, the candidates are always going to say, I had no idea what was going on. Richard Nixon tried that one. That there were some overzealous underlings in Creep that were doing this, and that Richard Nixon, had no idea it had happened, which turned out to be a lie. All right, listen, we got to take a break. Thank you for taking my call.
You got it. We're going to be back with the last segment of our show after these few words. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. Last segment of our program today here. A couple of little stories we're finishing up with. Over at Silicon Valley, as we know, all of the executives at these companies are heavily liberal. And apparently there was a big stink where Facebook fired one of their executives. He was Oculus co-founder and virtual reality wonderkin Palmer Luckey, rising star in Silicon Valley. And apparently at the height of the 2016 presidential campaign, he donated a modest $10,000 to an anti-Hillary Clinton group. This sparked a backlash from his colleagues, which then led to him being put on leave. 6 months later, he was fired. Now, I'm pretty sure that there are laws saying that you cannot be fired for your political beliefs. And I would recommend that this individual talk to a lawyer before the statute of limitations expires and basically say, yeah, you can't do that. All righty. Snowing in parts of Kansas right now. Snow along the Front Range here. And here's an interesting little article. This came on out from order.com. And it's all the times that we've been told we had just months to save the planet. And it starts out with the BBC, with their left-wing topical comedy MASH Report program, basically jumped on the recent announcement by the United Nations Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change that we have just 12 years left to save the planet. Now, apparently, Andrew Sims a year later said we had only 100 months to avoid disaster. Time ran out on that prediction in 2016. Al Gore told us we had just 10 years in July of 2008 to ensure the survival of the United States of America. So, yeah, that clock ran on out, and we're still here. Jim Henson, all the way back in 2009, warned that Obama only had 4 years to save Earth, which means Earth disappeared back in 2013. Prince Charles, back in May of 2008, said we had just 18 months to stop climate change. That gave us just until the end of 2009. Prince Charles, again, by July 2009, had said there's just 96 months to save the world. That clock ran out in 2017. Lester Brown published in 2009, we had only months, not years, to save civilization from climate change. It now has been years. And don't forget that wonderful prediction was in the British media. The UK Independent, March 20th, 2000, snowfalls are now a thing of the past. So, booga booga, be afraid. there's the music. Time for me to get on out of here and get something useful done with the rest of the day. Please stay tuned for John Stedmiller. I'm sure he's got lots of interesting things to share with you. Please take what you learn here and share it with everyone that you know. Take all this stuff about the very obvious ballot box stuffing that's going on all across the country and just literally put it right in the face of everybody that you know. We need to enrage the American people. We saw all of this back in 2000. We had 18 years to fix it. Nobody fixed it. The elections are still crookeder than a dog's hind leg. Anyway, have a good evening. Have a good Veterans Day. We'll be back tomorrow, and aloha, America.